Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the intended consequences of the Conservatives' elections bill, whose purpose is to make sure that the Tories can hold on to power after the next general election with an even smaller minority, which is very likely what they would get. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So this is going to be something that's going to keep coming up. So first of all, what I'd like to do is just to go down the list of objectives that the government have used to describe this monstrosity. This is for the elections bill that they're going to ram through Parliament in the next month or two. First of all, they say it makes elections secure. Now, to be clear, there has never been any evidence of significant voter fraud in any election in this country. Out of tens of millions voting, you get proven cases of fraud in a number of occasions that you could count on the fingers of one hand. In most years, you could blow a couple of fingers off in a fireworks incident and still count the fraud cases on that hand. But if they wanted to make them more secure, well, I would suggest you could start by not having private companies like iDocs handle the ballot boxes. What excuse is there for not having a publicly run group of civil servants to handle elections? Seriously. But the government are using the security argument to justify the introduction of photo voter ID. Now, they did rather undermine their own argument. See, they try to claim, when people say, hang on, what about people who don't have it? Oh, everyone has it. Everyone's got photo ID these days. It's all fine. But then when the government were opposing the use of photo ID for verification of accounts on social media, they said, terribly unfair. Not everyone's got photo ID. There's like 3.5 million people don't have it. No, we can't do that. Totally unfair. You can't have it both ways. Actually, they're Tories, so they can have it both ways. Secondly, they say it would be modern. I mean, modern literally means relating to the present as opposed to the remote past. Reducing the number of people who can vote is from the remote past. The modern democratic method is, of course, proportional representation. That's the new one. So although there are all sorts of arguments for and against all sorts of electoral systems, absolutely genuinely, this one is not up for debate. First past the post is not modern. It's ancient by definition. First past the post that reduces the number of people voting is absolutely a throwback. If they want modern, they want proportional representation. But of course they don't want modern. They want Tory governments in place almost all the time, something that has blighted our island for hundreds of years. Third, they say they want it to be inclusive. I mean, this is also not a matter of debate. As an adjective to describe their new system, not up for debate. It will objectively be exclusive. Really easy to prove this one. Making something more inclusive means, by definition, more people will participate. Easy test there. If fewer people vote at the next election, then these measures, when they're in place, and they will be in place, will have, by definition, made it less inclusive. And even without getting that final proof, because we'll have to go through an election to find that out, what measures are there in there that could even pretend to be designed to increase the numbers of people who participate? It's nothing at all. If they wanted to improve participation, you've basically got two options. The first would be to make voting compulsory, like they do in Australia. They're not going to do that. The Conservatives don't want everyone voting, for goodness sake. No extreme group of people ever would. And the second one is proportional representation again. You know, one thing that keeps people away from elections right now is the perception that their vote doesn't count in a lot of constituencies. Now, that's both true and untrue. It's untrue even, that if you look at the safest seat in the country, and I didn't actually find out which it is, but the seat with the largest majority in the land, that would still be flipped without anyone changing their vote if everyone who doesn't vote at all just went along in that constituency and voted for the candidate who would otherwise come second. No MP has a majority larger than the number of uncast votes. But of course, to do that would require a level of coordination in a large community, basically, that isn't realistic. So realistically speaking, there are some people who can rightfully say that yes, their vote doesn't count. Doesn't mean they shouldn't go and spend it though. But with proportional representation, your vote does count. You can vote for the party who best represents your views, and that vote is much more likely to actually get a representative for you elected in your region, no matter where you live. So no, this isn't about being exclusive, or inclusive rather. It is very exclusive. 4, the government say that this is about being transparent. Nothing this government does is transparent. They whipped their MPs to vote through the Brexit withdrawal bill without any debate or scrutiny in Parliament. They then had the nerve to say, oh, we didn't actually understand what was in it because we didn't spend the time giving it proper debate and scrutiny. The time that they voted to deny Parliament. The government also whipped its MPs to vote against letting Parliament scrutinise trade negotiations, trade deals. We don't even get to see the full text of agreements before they're signed. In fact, years after they're signed is when we'll get to see them in full. When we do see them, I suspect it will be by getting translations of copies from the other party. Ministers have been conducting activities involving spending vast sums of public money via personal email and WhatsApp so that investigators can't see the records of what was discussed. This is like the most opaque government we've had in modern times. And it's ludicrous to think that anything they do will be transparent. You know, they even changed the way press conferences work. They used to be held at Westminster where the government had no say over which journalists would be there. The problem with that is it meant they got awkward questions. Now they're held at Downing Street where the government gets to decide which journalists can ask questions. And they obviously only invite the tame ones. Frankly, these days, being allowed in a government press conference is a badge of dishonour within journalism, I would suspect. It marks you out as an anti-journalist, really, someone who is willing to sell out the country for your own career. Finally, they say that the new systems will be fair. Now, I've left this adjective until last because it's always crap. Fair is the most ambiguous term in politics, which is why it is also the most overused term in politics. You can argue for two completely contradictory systems to both be fair. I always remember my first critical thinking awakening. During the time when Thatcher's government was introducing the poll tax, had it explained to me by a teacher who was basically promoting it. And I went from that class convinced it was fair. Oh yeah, that makes sense. That's all fair. Nice. Yes. Then I had a friend's mother explain it to me. She was a socialist, you see. And then she convinced me that it was deeply unfair. Now, neither person lied. In terms of the points of fact, objective facts, they both agreed. They both presented the same facts. But the way they both presented it in terms of like whether it's fair or not, the poll tax was both completely fair and completely unfair. Now, I wouldn't say always mistrust a politician who uses the word fair, because they all do and they all have to. But always mistrust the word itself. But I would still argue that any system that means one person's vote is worth more than another's is unfair. And actually, when it comes to photo ID, my vote is worth not just twice as much, 3 times as much, infinitely more than someone without photo ID because they're not voting at all. One little proviso in a minute. They're moving constituency boundaries to give them more seats by lumping strong Labour areas together. The way that works is that means Labour get fewer seats. Larger majorities, safer seats, but fewer. A larger majority is worthless in a first-past-the-post system. They're also moving Tory voting areas, like the area I live in now, to marginal areas to make them more likely to swing Conservative. Because that's what you do at the moment. You've got a bit of a marginal there. There's a little area bordering it where they mostly vote Tory. We'll stick those in with them. That way it'll flip it over. So it'll be a safer Tory seat. They're preventing people voting at all if they don't have photo ID. And they're doing nothing to help them get that ID because it's not about security. It's about deliberately trying to stop them. That could actually backfire a little bit on them because Conservatives have been quite adept recently at persuading the sort of people who are less likely to have photo ID, actually. So that could bite them on the arse. But assuming it doesn't, it's still bad either way. But what I think Labour really need to do here is encourage these people to arrange postal voting. In fact, let's be honest, if the government want these measures in place, they'll get them. In theory, if the House of Lords refuse to let the worst of these through, the government will just ram it through a year later. But I wouldn't hold out much hope for the Lords blocking this. Not because they don't have the backbone to, but because they're unelected. There's an unwritten rule in the Lords, because they're unelected, they don't block legislation that was in the government's manifesto. In other words, if it was promised to the people in a democratic election, they don't block it. And this was in the manifesto. I think it was the infamous page 48, I believe. I warned about it at the time. I said that this might be the last general election that's remotely democratic. And it's coming. Nobody will stop it. Nobody can stop it. So the opposition will have to work with what they have. They will have the deck stacked against them like no other opposition in certainly modern times, maybe ever. You know, at the last election, Boris Johnson won his 80-seat supermajority with 43% of the popular vote. You look at polling that has them round about 40% now, and you go, I mean, first past the post, you can't just translate a popular vote share into number of seats in Parliament, but you look at it and you think, those seats were won, it was quite tight. 40% now, yeah, he probably can't get a majority now. That's probably his majority gone. But the next general election is not going to be fought in the same way as the last one. They're stacking the odds in favour of winning with way fewer votes. So what can the opposition do? Well, an electoral pact is the bare minimum. I also think it's coming. You know, a lot of people still panic about, why don't they announce it? It's coming. You know, if you look at statements made by Keir Starmer, it's coming. It's just not coming now. I also don't believe the other parties will refuse when push comes to shove. At the moment, the party leader who is most against it, like publicly most against it, is the Lib Dem leader. I don't think they'll go against it. I wouldn't panic about that. It's going to happen. It's just, there's no point in announcing something like that when there's not an election in the offing. So it won't be announced yet. Remember, there's local elections to come next year. That's an announcement for when there's a general election coming. They also need to heavily promote the use of postal voting. My fears of private companies such as IDOC's dealing with these, you know, for days ahead of the election is a concern of mine. I don't like the idea that these votes are just sat there for days, and it's not a public body that's in charge of them. But if you're not going to be able to vote at all on polling day because you haven't got a photo ID, postal voting is what you use. And opposition parties need to promote that. And I will, as I say, be talking more about this topic as and when it seems appropriate. I suppose as it goes through Parliament will be the next time. But those are my thoughts for now. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.